It's that time of year already, the midway point of this 2026 AFL home and away season. Some teams are just vying to find their best form, others are slowly starting to make their way up, and there are a couple of pace setters already, Fremantle and Sydney, spearheading the top two positions of the ladder. Welcome to another episode here of Out on the Full through Scoreboard Media. My name is Yuri Bilsic, and once again, it's great to have your listenership for this episode as I welcome back for another week my co-host, Woody from Wooden Spoon Data. Welcome back to the show, Woody.
Hey, mate. Thanks for having us again. Bit of a shorter one this week. We've got a few teams taking a week off, but just as many things to discuss, no doubt.
Plenty of dissection to do, Woody, as we've already discussed upon now. It's really started, not quite the business end yet, but just these important games at the midway point of the season can play out so much, whether it's for percentage, wins, losses, and arguably it's the foremost ladder, really, the percentage that does play such a significant difference. And you mentioned about those teams having to bye this week: Port Adelaide, Adelaide, Gold Coast, North Melbourne. So this is the first of 5 rounds where each the 18 clubs will have a bye to reset and recharge the batteries and really attack this second half of the season. But we'll start on a somber note, Woody, but also on a life that was celebrated to the fullest. Neil Daniher, who passed away from MND, motor neuron disease, at the age of 65. A massive pioneer behind this, just what he did to further bank on the research and the millions of dollars that he basically put forward to, and everything that was done for it. I think it was over $100 million in total that has gone into this research, and Australia by far is leading all the countries around the world in regards to this too. But where do you want to start first with the significant impact that he has left already too, and what does this do for other people who are battling MND to actually know that hopefully there'll at least be a cure sometime in the future behind his tremendous work?
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of the goal, right? Neil, I don't think ever really expected it to be 100% sorted out in his lifetime, but I think the goal of the big freeze and all the funds that have been raised is to eventually, find a way for these people to get back to a life they're used to living, and hopefully one day find treatments and a cure. Look, still work to be done in that field. We'd like to, hopefully one day soon see that come to an end, these sort of diseases and struggles. But still a lot of work to be done, and he's probably one of the biggest faces in this sort of sphere. So yeah, he's done amazing things, and hopefully we can see his efforts go to fruition at some point soon.
And we've seen a massive amount of work that's been done by scientists, researchers on all different kinds of diseases, right? Cancers, and finding a cure from it. And it's not easy, the work that goes into it. And the way that Neil was able to sort of use his platform and leverage it. And we'd already seen it, right? His coaching career days at Melbourne from 1998 to just past halfway through the 2000 season before he left the Demons. And it was just more than that too. He didn't see it as sort of for himself to almost go into this almost sorry, poor me type of stance way when he was diagnosed with MND in 2013. He always lived life to the fullest and wanted to attack it no matter what, and it had already been referred so many times that he called it the beast. But it was his way of acknowledging, but also just trying to find other positives in life. And we saw that by the number of sessions that he basically talked to the Melbourne players, right, in the lead up to the Freeze MND games, right, and talking about just grasping whatever opportunity comes your way, and no matter how small the opportunity may be or how big, just bask in it, because you never know what may happen. So he always had this positive outlook on various circumstances, and that's arguably the biggest legacy that he's going to leave. And it's most fittingly that there's going to be a state funeral, which the Victorian Premier Jacinta Allen mentioned only a couple of days ago, right, that it's going to take place. And how deserving is that too? Because it signifies everything that's been done. And probably don't get me started on one thing too, Woody, that I think some talk host on a Melbourne radio station said there shouldn't be a statue of Neil Daniher, which is, I think it's just complete buffoonery, to say the least. There should be a statue of him. I may be speaking totally out of my mouth on this, but he deserves it more than the next legendary footballer does. Your point of view?
Yeah, I mean, oh, look, everybody's got an opinion these days, right? Some of them probably don't need to go to air. That would be my thought on those statements. Look, yeah, I mean, he's done a huge amount for the footballing fraternity, be it, what he's done post football or during. And so I think it's a fitting sort of outcome. If you are going to give a statue to anybody, he's probably one that actually, you could see very few fans, apart from maybe one or two media heads, that would kind of have a problem with it, right? So, I think it'd be a nice sort of way to salute him. I also think it's good we are getting a state funeral. Look, I think in some regards, his effort to fight for so long. I mean, MND is expected of about a year and a half, generally from kind of being diagnosed that you might have left to live. So to go for beyond 10 years really shows the sort of effort he was kind of willing to put in. I think that really needs to be sort of respected in a lot of ways, whether that is a statue or a day in the footballing calendar, whatever it might be. I think all these sort of discussions are valid.
And it's the true testament to what he did, right, Woody? I think he even mentioned too when he was first diagnosed in late 2013 that this would only probably be a 27 more months to live. And I think one of his first speeches, right, prior to the very first inaugural MND game in 2015 was that I'm just going to just keep living for this, right? And whether it's be 5, 6, 7 years and however long it's going to be. And you absolutely nailed it on the head. It's, 13 years pretty much. And to go through the amount that he went through, I think it speaks volumes of the character that he is, and that was pretty much ingrained from his playing days, which could have been a legendary playing career, hadn't been for 3 ACL injuries when he was playing for Essendon, and then to bask in going into a coaching role as an assistant first to Essendon from 1992 to 1994, making a trip to be assistant as Fremantle Dockers from 1995 to 1997, and then coming back to coach a Melbourne side, right, which 2 years earlier could have potentially merged with Hawthorn at the end of the 1996 season, takes them to a prelim final in 1998. 2 years later, they get to a grand final after a brilliant second half of the season, which pretty much was catapulted by Jeff Farmer's 9 second-half goals against Collingwood in the King's birthday clash when he didn't even have a single possession in the first half. And I think Neil benched him for the entirety of that opening half when rotations then were completely different. But the former players of him and Adam Uze and Russell Robertson more recently spoke about how he just treated them like they were his sons, and he was basically a father figure to majority of the players, and he just had his shoulder that you could lean on. Yes, he could be extremely strict, and that was fine, but the players wanted to play for him, and I think that just only sort of further solidified his legacy, not only as Melbourne coach, having the 4th most wins of all time as Demons coach, but everything that he's done within the 4 walls of the football community and also outside too for MND. So, vow to Neil Daniher too, and everything else that has gone to as well, and all our commiserations to the Daniher family. Is there any sort of final adding thoughts you want to have, Woody?
Well, I do think it's fitting you end on his coaching prowess and what the players were willing to kind of do, and what he was asking of his players is we've seen a bit of a change in recent weeks. So, mate, do we want to get on to Brad Scott and what's going on with Essendon?
Wow, did you almost feel as though some strange reason something was going to occur in the last couple of weeks? You sort of heard murmured reports that something was starting to come to the surface. We saw probably 6 weeks earlier Andrew Welsh, who's the main director of Essendon's board, say that Scott his coaching sort of position would be intact, right? He'd be an next premiership coach. That doesn't materialise, and it was a whole sort of litany of different areas that sort of just didn't quite mesh together. And even I think Scott spoke about this on afl.com.au with Callum Toomey in a 39-minute chat, how he probably wasn't the short-term fixed coach for the Bombers to quickly go into finals. If they wanted to get someone else, then they had to probably look elsewhere, perhaps too. But just where do you want to start with this?
Phew. Where do you, I mean the interview post that has come out with I think incredibly telling of where Essendon and their board is at. I think this often, these sort of things don't necessarily become a board discussion, but I think the more that you look at Essendon, the more clearly that this is a board level problem. And I'm not sure that Andrew Welsh has done anything but make it worse, to be honest. I think he's part of the old boys club that essentially were looking to get Hurdy in. He got Dean Solomon in straight after. I mean, he appointed Dean Solomon from a position on the board to an assistant coach role. And I want, they said there was some metrics around, Brad Scott staying there and being their next premiership coach. I tend to wonder, who set those metrics, if it was Dean Solomon and the board. And I mean, at the end of the day, like, you couldn't have more misaligned sort of wording coming out, right? Like, I think Brad was really telling in what he thought was best for the club in his interview, saying, we couldn't sell the farm for Harley. We probably should have let Merritt go. The sort of decisions that we make as a whole club, I have to front as, and, back them in whether I 100% agreed on them or not. And, I think he's been fed to the wolves in some regards. I don't think he's a great coach, but I think in terms of list balance and where Essendon are at, it seemed like he was doing what I would suggest Essendon need to do in a lot of regards. And to have or to have this expectation that Essendon were going to play finals is a bit farcical for me. But I mean, I'm not at the club. I'm not at the board. I don't know what their decisions are. So maybe I'm completely wrong here, and maybe Brad hasn't told us the entire truth. But from what I can understand, what I see as a third party, it just looks like a club that has been handed over to the group that essentially lost control when Hurd was last ousted, and they're going to give it another crack, as far as I can tell. I don't know, mate. Do you think Hurd's a good choice as their next coach?
Oh, it's puzzling. I think you got to move past it, Woody, too. You don't see many coaches, if not hardly any at all, come back and coach for a second time once again. It just doesn't sit right. You've got to move on. And yes, Kevin Sheedy's there on the board, and he was the one that was advocating for her to become coach, right, when Scott was appointed in late September of 2022. So
that in turn, like, you go back to then, and the original words out of the club were that we 100%, all of the board backed Scott in. And then one of the board members, Kevin Sheedy, walks out and says, "Hey, that's not true. I'm a board member and I didn't back him in." Like, there couldn't be, like, that club, it genuinely, I think, giving it to Andrew Welsh was one of the worst decisions that could have been made. And getting Dean Solomon in, backing in Sheedy's ideas of going back, 15 years at this point and trying to redo it all. Just ridiculous. But that's me. I mean, I'm also a Saints fan, and in some regards, go for it. Like, I'd love you to. I'd absolutely love to see Essendon spend another 5-10 years at the bottom of the ladder and blame everybody else and not realise that it's them doing the same problems as always. But maybe this is what they need. Maybe they needed to hand over to these guys that have been working on the sidelines, sniping out Essendon people, going, yeah, all right, give it to them. Watch them destroy the club for 5 to 10 years. We'll take it back over and we'll finally fix it. Because maybe that is what they need to do. Because these people along the sidelines are now in charge of the club. Again, they've slowly infiltrated the club. They've started sniping out their own, and they're getting back the people that they think should be in charge. So, I don't know, mate. Like, this is like, it just reminds, as a Saints fan, this reminds me so much of St Kilda in like the 90s and like early 2000s. It is just no, like headless chooks leading headless chooks and people thinking they know better than everybody else that, you know, is employed to study and then taking over and then ruining it. I don't know. I don't think they should do it. And you could get me talking about this forever. I've got, anytime Herd's brought up and it's somebody says, oh, you know, Herd's got this interesting opinion, my general response is nobody should listen to Herd about anything, because the last time that happened, it ruined a football club. So, like, I don't know, mate. Like, this is wild to me. Absolutely wild. But, yeah, I don't have an answer. It's wild. This is absurd.
Yeah, I can still picture what happened probably in late September 2010, Woody. So this was after Matthew Knights was let go by the club after their final round loss to the Western Bulldogs, and they're in search for their next coach. And Herd sort of reluctantly didn't want to put his hand up for the coaching position because he'd already been, at the time, he was an expert commentator on Fox Sports, normally the Sunday twilight games, alongside Brian Taylor. So he sort of had no interest in it. And then eventually a few weeks later, he came out that, oh, James Herd's going to be the Essendon coach, and here we go now, and sort of the little changes to within the whole structure department, the football club, and sort of be this messiah type. Which, okay, for parts it worked, right. They were top four for 3/4 of 2012, completely bomb out because they had a litany of soft tissue injuries. 2013, the Asada Supplement saga, which started on February 5th. 2014, he's out of the game because of it. 2015 comes back and then he's gone by their round 20 flogging at the hands of the Adelaide Crows. And I think going back to old values and sort of old ways doesn't work anymore. You got to go past the old times and look ahead to the future. And because the game evolves, right? And innovative ideas always take shape for how a club wants to play. And we've seen that, right, with so many teams in recent seasons doing that. And take you on board, whether it's an assistant coach of the club, right, Sydney now from John Longmire to Dean Cox, Brisbane, right, Chris Fagan. Yes, he had his time as an assistant coach at Hawthorn, but also as an assistant at Melbourne and doing a number of years there. Craig McRae, who served 15 years as an assistant before finally getting his chance at Collingwood and leading them to the flag in 2023. So you got to look past that too. And also to your point, Woody, about St Kilda and everything else, about the whole basket shenanigans from the late 1990s to early 2000s, can truly attest to that, being a Carlton supporter, is that the whole merry-go-round circus still goes on. And it doesn't always... yes, it rots from the head from the coach, unfortunately, but it's within the four sanctum walls of the board, which make the difference.
And it's wild to me how similar, like, Grant Thomas and Dean Solomon are basically the same person 20 years apart. They are 100% the same person. So, I don't, like, this has just stupid written all over it. Like, and to be honest with them, like, people, and I'm taking shots here at Andrew Welsh, I get it, and I'm taking a lot. But, like, if you're going to, like, bank your hopes on a, like, CEO property developer, oh, good luck. Like, good luck. Mate, just try and think of any properties you've ever seen, ever, get done quickly, on time, on budget, anything, like anything to target or to specs, just doesn't happen. Like, why would you get somebody that is from a world that is notoriously known as maybe half a step up from real estate agents as your next one in charge of a football club? It baffles me to think that, like, because he's a good business mind, and, you know, that's debatable, that he is going to help that club was silly from the start, especially knowing the connections he had to Sheeds, to Dean Solomon, to Herd, to all the old heads that would essentially, as you know, get people to fall on sword so that they can take over. But yeah, it's just this is probably, like, if this works, awesome. It's a great story. But if it doesn't work, it's almost just as good a story. And in hubris, just lack of learning, lack of ability to adapt, just consistently in rumination about years that were better rather than ever looking forward and developing. And I think this is where Brad, in the end, comes away looking like the smart one of everyone, despite the fact he led a team that had one win in bloody 2 years or something. And it's because he walks away saying, well, yeah, I kept saying in the board, like, yeah, this is going to suck, but like, how else are we going to get better? And the board just kept giving me silly ideas, like spending $22 million or, over like $22 million over 10 years on one player is like, let's say the cap keeps going up, right? Like that's at least 10% of your cap on one player for a decade. That is just incredible mismanagement. If it were to have happened, I mean, St Kilda gets, a fair bit of discussion on how we manage our cap. To do that is pretty wild. But look, at the end of the day, that's footy. Brad had to fall on the sword so that somebody else could take over and try and lead them to a premiership, or at least, a final, maybe a finals win. It's been a bit. So, look, hopefully this leads to something. If it's Hurdy and success, I'll be stunned. But look, stranger things have happened in footy, as I've said a few times.
22 long years it's been, right, since Essendon last won a final, which came against Melbourne, the elimination final, all the way back in 2004. We'll move on from those topics now, Woody, and start with the first of the 5 bye rounds. There's 7 games this round, which kicks off on Thursday night. Your Saints against Hawthorn under the roof at Marvel Stadium. And we've seen since 2019 how St Kilda winning 6 of 9 contests, but Hawthorn have taken 3 of the last 4 matchups since 2023. Just one question off the bat for you, Woody. So against top teams, right, the point of difference, right, you've been in quarters against Brisbane, more recently against Fremantle. What do you feel as though the bridge of the gap is to close those last 30 minutes against those quality sides? And what's it going to take, right, in terms of sort of ground balls and everything to sort of really split the difference?
I actually don't think it requires much. Well, I don't think you need to focus on the fourth quarter to start winning the fourth quarters. St Kilda has consistently shown they can beat sides in the first quarter, and it tends to be that by the third quarter and the start of the fourth, that it's a battle again. So I think for me, it just comes down to St Kilda, when there's, it's early in the match, instructions are fresh, there's not much change to initial, plans and structures. They're probably fairly on top in some regards, but it seems to kind of wane as you get to the, half-time mark, three-quarter time mark. So for me, it'll be a lot more like cleanliness throughout the second and third quarters, and really just being able to put other teams into the position where they need to fight back rather than it be a tussle in the fourth. So yeah, for me, like, I think a few people have come out and said St Kilda played quite well against Fremantle, and I thought we played awfully, like genuinely shockingly. There was maybe a handful of plays where I thought we were doing what we've been, changed into doing over this last sort of couple of months. And it really felt like we were falling back into the worst habits that we had last year. So, look, I'm glad that, others can see something good out of that, because I think St Kilda has a lot of good in some regards. But I don't think they showed much of it last week, to be frank. I think the first quarter wasn't bad, but beyond that, it was mediocre at best until the last quarter, where you'd struggle to call it mediocre. Look, I think the Saints can be a very good side. It's just they're not able to consistently keep the ball rolling beyond the first quarter. And if they can start doing that, they'll be much more threatening. And I think, look, the back half of the season, not moving around, staying in Melbourne, will give them a chance to really solidify things. So, look, hopefully post post-bye, it's not too many more injuries. Get to even see a world maybe with Max King again, and see what we can do come the end of the season. Challenge for the finals, challenge in the finals. See what we can do, as I said. But look, at this stage, it'd be kind of get the squad back together. There's a few injuries, and just try and get a win on the board. This week will be quite important with obviously some potential returns to Hawthorn. Looking at Jack Gunston possibly coming in. Likewise with Will Day, as he played in the VFL last week, looked quite good. And look, that'll challenge St Kilda. I think the Saints have only lost clearances once this year against the Lions in round 3. So they've been on a pretty good streak in that regard. Centre clearance, it's been a little bit less consistent. I think there's 4 losses in that regards. But you look at this time last year and St Kilda had 2 positive differentials out of centre clearance. So I think there's clear improvement from the Saints. Is it going to be enough to match a returning Will Day in the midfield? I think there's a little bit of movement from the Hawthorn out of their ruckman. They might not have both this week. So that might be an area St Kilda can take advantage of, as it does look like Marshall has been given the all clear. And from there, it's, can we start moving the ball a little bit more effectively to give our forwards an actual chance? Because defensively, it's not too bad, but you don't want to be sitting there just defending all night. So, looking forward to this match. I think we match up relatively well. I'm glad Barras isn't in. I'd like it if Gunston could miss one more week, but we'll see how it goes.
Yeah, I just think when it comes to sort of the whole ball movement side of things for the Saints and Hawthorn, what they were able to do really well after quarter time against Adelaide was sort of just shut down those really easy kicks and force you down the line quite a number of times. And it wasn't the most prettiest game Hawthorn played last week, but it was sort of very workmanlike in terms of their ground contest level. And I think that's where a lot of those pivotal moments are going to come from. We saw it the last probably 4 minutes of the game against Adelaide. Nick Watson had a really important ground ball win in the last, I think, minute 40 of the contest. And it's just those that's going to play such a telling part. And then you have sort of a few little magnet changes which Sam Mitchell often comes up with, right? Blake Hardwick, not for the first time, right, was playing as a forward, kicked 4 goals against the Crows. He did so in gather round against Collingwood a couple of years ago. So they have such flexibility within their half, the Hawks. But if you're the Saints too, and you can get on top of clearances, because they are vulnerable in that state. If you can win enough stoppages and enough territory and lock the ball in your forward 50, then you can start getting scores from there, or win a free kick or 2 for a high tackle or pushing the back, holding the ball, etc., etc. So I sort of see those areas being so dynamic. And now is a part early for St Kilda. The first couple of goals last Friday night against Fremantle both came from centre clearances. So if you can generate enough of those to somehow minimise Newcomb's impact within the clearance game, then I think there's every chance that the Saints can win. And then you have the flexibility, right, of splitting DeConing and also Rowan Marshall's minutes between ruck and forward, and that's really come along in this last month. And so those are just, I think, a few areas that the Saints can get a hold of. And this whole makeshift improvised forward line that the team's dealing with at the moment too is, I think it's quite admirable, to say the least, at the moment. Your thoughts on that?
Yeah, it is interesting. Had we had the mid-season draft on a Monday, I dare say Cameron Lake might have pushed for a selection, to be honest. Campbell Lake, that's his name. Yeah, look, I think the Saints forward line is, it's their big problem at the moment. Missing Owens, you're missing Higgins, you're missing Max King too, but that's by the by. You're still missing Liam Ryan. Butler's out too, and you could kind of go down the list a little bit further. But yeah, it's getting slimmer there. We've had Liam Henry sitting as kind of that dedicated pocket the last couple of weeks, where he's probably a little bit better in that half forward sort of role, maybe up to the wing. And Bradley Hill has had to come in as a pocket and had kicked 2 goals last week. I think he did similar the week before, whether it was 1 or 2, I kind of forget. But look, it's working in some regards. I think defensively we match up pretty evenly. Both sides are pretty good structurally, defensively. It'll really come down to, do we give ourselves enough opportunity forward of the ball? With that opportunity, do we actually use it well? If that's the case, then I think we have a really good shot of actually pushing the Hawks. But if we don't, and we do kind of what we did last week, long kicks down the line, really telegraphed footy, it's going to be a tough night.
Should be a good game, though, too, St Kilda, where they sit at the moment, and they've spoken on record, too, about these next 3 weeks being extremely important. I think Jake from Saints TV also outlined the same area as well in one of his recent episodes, just this block, and could really set up St Kilda's season, whether they win 2 of 3 and start really pushing up the runs of the ladder. And for Hawthorn, too, after what being sort of a 3-week patch, a draw against Collingwood, a loss against Fremantle, being overrun in the last quarter, pretty lackluster performance the week after against Melbourne. I feel as though it's probably those 3 weeks that they needed a real kick up the backside, and we saw that midway point last year, right, when they lost 3 games in a row and were able to reverse their fortunes around. We'll move on to Friday night's game at the MCG between Carlton and Geelong. Woody, the Cats sitting third on the ladder at the moment, 8 wins, 3 losses. The Blues have won their last 2 games under interim coach Josh Fraser. Carlton's also won the last 2 meetings against Geelong, both at the MCG, round 7 last year and round 15 of 2024. Probably the start of this too, Woody, is probably within the forward half structure dynamics for Geelong and their ability to shut down opposition and lock the ball in their forward half. Just the real emphasis you see on that too for the Cats and for Carlton too. I think they'd be able to sort of break away from that quite well the last couple of weeks.
Yeah, I mean, both sides don't mind a stoppage, to be fair. Look, I know that recent history suggests that Geelong might not find Carlton that easy, but I'm not sure that it'll quite go that way this time. I think the fairy tale run post-Voss might be over this week. That being said, I do think there is a good chance that Carlton push them, but Geelong's on an incredible run of form of recent, and right now they're starting to push away as potentially the favourite in terms of the premiership at the end of the year. So I struggle to see how Carlton on a bit of a turnaround and a bit more form can really push the very, very top sides. Maybe that kind of run below is still kind of possible now that they've found something new, but I struggle to see it against Geelong, even though they've got that home advantage. That being said, if they're going to do it, I mean, contested possession and trying to lock it in Geelong's forward line gives Carlton an opportunity to kind of get that stoppage and maybe win it, get the run going. So, look, I think if Carlton are going to do it, it's going to be stoppage transition from defensive half, and it's going to have to be efficient running down the line. You're going to need to draw the player, handball over the top, have somebody running with you. You're probably not looking for a target inside 50. You've probably got a 1 out. Maybe you kick it to him. Maybe you just go for the flying shot from 60. But for me, if Carlton are going to do it, it's because they can match the centre clearances. When it does end up in their defensive half, they can actually run it out and get the goals. So I'm a little bit worried about their efficiency in inside 50 and whether they can actually score, but I still think there'll be a good game on the cards. I'd suggest the Cats probably pull away at some point in the second half.
And trying to stop Bailey Smith and Max Holmes, probably the 2 biggest priorities for the Blues at the moment. Though both their leg speed from the outside is just so dynamic, and you give them such a hectare of space. They're basically impossible to stop with the run and carry that they do provide. And then you have on top too Tanner Bruin, most likely to return this week after being rested the previous week in their win over Sydney. So there's a couple of really sort of the deep midfield options they have there too. Ocean Mullen, we've already spoken about, and probable matchup on Sam Walsh perhaps. He's also absolute running machine too, is Mullen, and his ability as well to keep with opponents and keep them pretty locked down. And Walsh has had a pretty good last couple of weeks, and that's probably the dynamic out of that area for the Blues, is trying to bite enough of those kicks back in the middle. And we've spoken about now the last 2 weeks and how that has paid off. Sometimes it hasn't paid off, but it is the risks that you're willing to take as long as they do come through. And yes, they're not always going to happen 100% of the time, and you sort of have to play within certain different directions and try and move the ball into other parts of the field on the outer side wing and try and create your overlap from there, which they've done quite well the past fortnight too. So that's probably a watch there. And then also you mentioned too, Woody, just Geelong's defensive ability, right? Zone off, help for one another. It gets very tricky once they do get numbers back in their defensive 50 to pick out an easy target. So whether the Blues do go for those scrambly kicks along the way, I think that's maybe something else they do improvise a bit with too, and try and at least keep Geelong's defenders on the back foot a little bit too. So those are just a few probably other areas perhaps they could potentially use to try and get somewhat of an advantage. But apart from now, Geelong's ability from turnovers, that's probably the biggest worries. Just seeing every single time when a team does go from the back 50, there's an errant kick that goes in, and straight away a Geelong player will just have it on the forward 50, Graham Myers, for example, and lace out Jeremy Cameron in the forward pocket or go for goal himself. So those are some really, I think, areas that the Blues have to rectify as well throughout the game if it does go that way, and how they're able to slow down Geelong's ability to score from turnover may prove a substantial difference to the outcome of the game. We'll move on to the first of the 3 Saturday contests now, Woody. This one firstly taking place at the SCG between Sydney and Richmond. It's the first matchup between the sides at the venue since 2022. And quick trivia for you, Woody. When was the last time the Tigers beat the Swans at the SCG?
Oh, I'd assume some point in their three-peat, but I'm not sure. I'm just going to have a guess around like 2017, some sort of time then.
Round 13, 2015 was the last time the Tigers beat the Swans at the venue, and that's when they came back from 31 down in the first half. And I think just assessing this game too, Woody, the Swans, of course, the loss last week to Geelong, and sort of there were a few parts of their game that were taken away from them, and we saw that against Collingwood. And probably the biggest part for Richmond, at least last week, and albeit against Essendon, was the amount of pressure they were able to put on the ball carrier and really disrupt a lot of Essendon's play, and really broke down their chains and forced a good amount of stoppages too. Within the whole dimensions of this though, again, Sydney is a completely different proposition with the Swans' ability to just transition from one end to the other and get runners overlapping for 3 or 4 handballs in exchange too. Just the biggest focus for the Tigers, and how potentially do they somehow minimise this Sydney train that's firing along?
Some things are impossible in life, man. You know, like it's just like I'm not going to be an astronaut one day, right? And like Richmond's not going to win this. That's the answer. Yeah, I mean, you could like there's nothing really pointing in Richmond's favour, as far as I can tell. Twice as many like goal kickers that have kicked twice as many goals. Oh, yeah, there's not. I don't think there's much, man. I think you take the win that you got last week, and you go, hey, that's the bottom. We're about to verse the top. We maybe get some sort of idea where we are. You know, you're not at the bottom, so be thankful for that and do your best. That's all you can really try. Sydney will win this, I don't know, 100, like 200. Like, I mean, Richmond looked all right last week, but they're playing a side that is barely a football team. And, like, I get that Richmond is also barely a football team, which is kind of why it's like it's respectable, but also when you're facing, like, the top-level AFL side or one of the top AFL sides and you're barely scraping together 22, 23 players, oh, mate, like it's going to be 100 points easily. So, I don't know. Keep your chin up. There's always next year.
Well, couldn't say it any more, Woody, too, because Richmond's injury list, which has already been well documented, they won't have Jonty Fall with concussion. Tom Lynch is out with that larynx injury, which I think he hurt in the first half, so that also opens way for Liam Fawcett to come back into the side, and he'd shown some promising signs too in the early stages of his career. The game against Port Adelaide in round 4, where he competed really well for a few marking contests. I think he kicked a couple of goals that day too, but within the whole sort of structure of Sydney's forwards at the moment, for Marty, Curnow, they're firing at the moment. Richmond's backline too, they had to play Luke Traynor as the second tall defender last Friday night, so it really put them undersized at best, the Tigers, and leaving quite a fair amount on Ben Miller's shoulders to shoulder what is quite a substantial load. So it's going... It'd probably be a long day for the Tigers, but if they can somehow at least make it respectable, then I think you take any sort of positivity away with the win. And also with some of their youngsters who've shown some really good signs. Sam Cumming, Patrick Rechko, who got the Rising Star nod the previous round. So all those little mini wins, I think if you're a Richmond supporter for the time being, that you do take during this whole rebuild at the moment, which depending on how long it does go for, we don't have a crystal ball for the time being.
Oh, mate, they're screwed. Like, they're screwed. Like, Tassie's coming in and about to just knock every one of their, like, everyone's picks out of whack. But, like, I was in Saints shoes I'm a Saints fan, and they were in Richmond shoes when GWS and the Giants came in, and it just puts your rebuild back 5 years. Like, maybe you hit on everybody, and, like, it doesn't hit you as bad. And, like, there were some teams that bounced in that sort of era, but there was a lot of teams that didn't. And there was a lot of extended premiership runs by very few teams in the sort of mid-2010s. So I think we might be in for a fairly long couple of years, mate. We're already, on the edge of a three-peat. We might see another something similar soon, and before we get very few turnover in the coming season. So, look, I hope they nail their next few picks, but let's move on to an interesting match.
And this one arguably is match of the round, Woody, up at the Gabba between Brisbane and Fremantle. And the Lions have hit a skid, right? They've lost their last couple of games by over 40 points, which marks the first time that has happened to a team since rounds 4 and 5 of 2019. So 7 long years it's been, right, since they've lost 2 games by more than 40 points, and both of them really just lackluster performances, particularly the third term last week against the Giants when they gave up 14 goals in a row. There was a 7-goal patch to start with within the first 12 minutes of the third term, and they just couldn't stop the hemorrhaging. And against the Fremantle side, which have been so good at clearances, stoppages, just all around, they just know when to flick the switch on, when to slow the game down a little bit, when to make it sort of a little bit of a grind, a little bit, not too much, not the old way that used to be beforehand. And I think it's going to really challenge the Lions at the moment. I think Woody, something probably for the time being isn't quite gelling at the moment. And we saw a couple of times the last 2 years where they've had a few off games. One was against the Suns in round 20 last year. They lost by 11 goals. The other one was in round 7, 2024, when the Giants completely towed them up. And that was pretty much the revival to their season, end up winning the flag that year. But what is it particularly just within the concerns, within the whole stoppages and just being outworked and out-hunted pretty much for the past fortnight?
I mean, I think there's been a few people that have gone over this, but Brisbane looked lazy. There was a lot of one-way running and positioning yourself as if you're going to win the contest and then doing nothing if you didn't. Look, this can happen to premiership sides. You can kind of get a little bit of a drought. You can kind of think, hey, it'll just start clicking, and it doesn't always. If it were just stats on paper, I'd be kind of leaning towards Freo, not by much, but probably a little bit. But then you consider it's at the Gabba. You consider what happened last week and how most sides would respond if you're on the backside of a belting like that, especially when you're not just terrible. So with that, it's got me thinking Brisbane probably gets it done. But they haven't looked great this last month or so. And yeah, I mean, and Freo's looked quite good. If Freo can get it done away from home against the back-to-back premiers, it really does solidify, their sort of standing and their, where they want to go for the end of the year. But also that loss would bring into a lot of questions to Brisbane. So I'm gonna go Brisbane just on the fact that you don't normally see such a flip from premiership favourite to premiership favourite. It doesn't happen often in the game. So I'm going to back Brisbane to find a little bit of form and get it done at home.
And the Dockers haven't won at the venue since 2016, so it has been quite a long time since drinks. I think Brisbane won the last 4 matchups against Fremantle at the venue too, so quite a fair amount of incentive on that. And particularly the last 5 games, Woody, I was just having a deep dive on this too. Lions are 15th for points off turnovers, 56 a game, which it just don't normally resonate with how compact and astute they are and how well they communicate with each other on the defensive end and knowing when to help one another and just knowing when to land in the right spots to intercept. And something just hasn't quite sort of gone awry the past fortnight. And against Fremantle, who do a lot of damage in terms of forward ground ball gets inside their forward 50 too, that may be probably an area that the Dockers can exploit, and particularly with the 3 forwards they do have with Tracy, Amos and Voss.
Yeah, I mean, there's a few things they can exploit. Apparently, all the rules with Voss as well. So, yeah, I mean, Freo by 100 now that I think about it. 100 frees right in front of goal. I'm sure they'll get them all. Yeah, I don't know. I think this is an interesting match because I feel like Brisbane has been challenged in years prior and just kind of started to find some form, and the noise has disappeared around their issues as the year goes on, and suddenly they're in a premiership and they've won it again. It's just not quite going that way yet. I still feel like Brisbane could turn the tables and get their season back on track, but the narrative that they've kind of dealt with in the past just seems to be getting to them this time, and or it just seems to mean something more. So, yeah, I'm not sure that Brisbane's fully out of the woods, even if they get a win. It'd be good too against a reasonable side like Freo, but I find this one hard. I don't, unless they truly come out and put Freo to the sword. It's hard to forget what happened last week. It's hard to forget what they've done in the last month or so. And yeah, the questions get a little bit louder.
And sometimes form does take a little bit of a while to reverse around too, and trying to get a couple of solid wins in the process and try and rebuild some of that confidence too, which I think Brisbane were accustomed to 2 years ago, right? There was a back end of last season in little patches here and there. I think the Giants game at the Gabba was probably another good wake-up call, and as mentioned, against the Suns 6 weeks after that too, definitely sort of gave them that shock. And then you combine now on top with the qualifying final loss to Geelong and really having their backs against the wall and no second chances. So they've been in those positions beforehand, Brisbane. So it's nothing new, and probably expect them a lot to embrace that. And Josh Dunkley was pretty steadfast in his press conference about how this is not a blip, and you take that word with a grain of salt. Now we just have to see what happens on the field against a Dockers side with their midfield, which can put in so many rotations through there, and guys that go under the radar for their defensive work. Matthew Johnson last week, his job on Hugo Garcia. He's done a few shutdown roles the last couple of seasons. One on Ed Richards in round 4 at Optus Stadium. I think he held him to 23 disposals. So they have those magnets there for him out that they can put around, and it's going to really challenge Brisbane's midfield and challenge them for their accountability running both ways, as you mentioned too, Woody, which was absolutely non-existent in the third quarter against the Giants. We'll move on to Saturday night's game at Marvel Stadium between the Western Bulldogs and Collingwood, and the Bulldogs pulled off what was a pretty brave 3-point win last week against Melbourne, and the Magpies too celebrated Scott Pendlebury's record-breaking milestone 433rd game with a win over the Eagles, but sadly 3 injuries to come away with that for Collingwood. Jamie Elliott doing his ACL in the last 4 minutes of the game. Darcy Moore, once again, hurting his hamstring. And Will Hayes dislocating his shoulder in the marking contest. So those 3 are out for the Magpies. And the Bulldogs won't have Tim English back. That's from all reports at the moment. So he still battles those ongoing concussion symptoms within the whole league protocols, sadly. So where do you sort of want to assess this too, Woody? Because Collingwood's defence is still at their best at the moment, still holding up extremely well. And the Bulldogs, that was the type of footy that we're normally accustomed to seeing the Doggies play, being just a lot more adventurous with the ball. And a lot of their prime movers got into it.
Yeah. It's hard to know what to think with like 2 sides as injured as these are. I tend to, when both these sides have everybody, they're both good sides, but with the outs that they have, they're almost both frauds in some regards. I mean, if Bont was gone, the Western Bulldogs would just not exist. And I mean, you could almost say the same either to Nick Dacos or Pendle, where he flip a coin in some regards. But yeah, I mean, these sides are just the walking wounded. And look, maybe you've got a little bit more faith in the Doggies. I don't know, mate. Like, I don't think neither of these sides have particularly good scoring power at the moment. Dogs don't have a great defence. I'm not sure that I agree with you about Collingwood's defence doing amazingly. I think their midfield mostly stops enough entries from getting to their defence. So I think they're pretty average for me. They're not great. They're not bad. Yeah, look, if the Doggies could play well like they did last week, yeah, maybe they get this done. I'm just not convinced that they're going to be efficient enough. They're probably not going to win the contest enough without English, but then there's always Bont, so it's hard to say. So look, I think either way, this isn't a big win to either side. But I don't know that we're going to see much of a scoring match either. I think we might get a 60-80 sort of situation for both sides. But yeah, if this was a healthy Bulldogs and a healthy Collingwood, I think we'd be looking at one of the better matches for the round.
Yeah, definitely in regards to that too, Woody. The Bulldogs, at least for last week too, fixed up some of their scoring woes. They kicked 14 goals. 993 in the process, Ryan. We talked about in the previous episode too, with so much that saw the mantle being left on Aaron Norton's shoulders. He had a solid game last week, coming into it, kicking 26 goals, and then really sort of after that too, Will Lewis, who actually, apart from being super inaccurate in front of the sticks, some of his pressure acts along the way actually helped the Dogs win the ball back inside their forward 50. So they managed to get that back, and Riley Westbury knocked on about him for the last 4 weeks now. He's recapturing his best form from last season too, and he had a pretty engaging matchup with Colton Tolstrup, who we'll talk about a little bit later on in the Melbourne GWS game, considering the last 6 weeks he's spent up as a small forward. But those are probably the parts, I think, for the Bulldogs too, if they can really get those attacking dynamics going away from clearance, which was probably the biggest part for why they're out to set up that 5-goal lead last week against Melbourne. And Ed Rich has been a big part of that. And yes, his season's been up and down by his standards, and he managed to equal his season high 30 disposals, and all of them were to significant effect. I think he went over 80% disposal efficiency or something like that off the top of my head. And his kicking was really good last week and set up a lot of their scoring involvement. So those are parts, him and Bontempelli. And I saw a takeaway from last week's game, Woody, is it wasn't just Bontempelli's kicking, which has always been great, but it was his hands in traffic. If you sort of took a closer look at him being under significant duress, but still being able to have the composure and find a teammate without coughing the ball up, it's something that I think maybe even that goes unnoticed a fair bit too, because 18 of his 29 disposals last week were handballs, and normally it's the opposite way around for Bontempelli. He's normally kicking the ball more than he's handballing, so it was just something of note there too. But even I think sometimes probably their backline, and yes, it gets maligned and all that too. We could probably again bang on about it for hours. Buku Kamas being in defence, and he had a solid 2 games to start the season, is that they're just going to have to just try and hold it up. And Collingwood don't have sort of within the tall forward potency structure, so maybe they're able to sort of repel a few more 450 entries of Collingwood's and try and get them on the rebound through Bailey Dale. And we see how destructive Dale can be with his run and carry and really setting up the Bulldogs' attacks from the defensive half. And also Matt Candy's important role too. He can play sometimes as a shutdown midfielder, but just really that hard in and under that sort of, I know, in between games, he sort of has disappeared time and, well, bits and pieces throughout the season. But I think it should be a close game, Woody, and probably it won't be a blowout, I don't think, with the way both teams are operating at the moment.
I don't think so. A couple of goals either way.
We'll see how it all pans out too for the Bulldogs and Magpies Saturday night at Marvel Stadium. We'll move on to the first of 2 Sunday games now. This one taking place at Traeger Park up in Alice Springs between Melbourne and GWS. And this game too is probably it's fairly difficult to decide who does win this too, because the Giants have won the last 3 encounters, but they've only been by a combined total of 7 points. They won the previous matchup up at the venue back in 2023 by 2 points. It was a very low-scoring game that afternoon. The Giants only registered 47 points, whereas Melbourne only kicked 45 points on the afternoon. The whole dynamics between the two teams, Woody, do you see somewhat of a counter-attacking game going on in this one too, or do you see sort of the history of the scores at the venue being sort of a pretty subdued affair for both teams?
Look, I think this will be fairly counter-attack based footy. I'm not sure that we see great skills. Up in Alice, it's always a bit warmer, people sweat more, that sort of stuff. The one time these two have gone head-to-head at this venue, it did go GWS's way. Look, I tend to think if the Giants can access the form they accessed in that third quarter, I mean, very few sides can run with them. But I think these are 2 fairly similar structured sides. It'll be great watching. Of the matches this weekend, I think the Brisbane Fremantle matches, they'll probably be the 2 most entertaining. I tend to lean GWS's way. I'm interested to see how Clayton Oliver goes against his old side. Been running almost off the half back in some regards this year. Bit surprising considering how Melbourne fans used to talk about his ball use, but he's been looking pretty good this year. So I'm interested to see how that goes. I will back in the Giants, but not confidently.
Yeah, I've also got the Giants winning this one narrowly, Woody. And Toby Green, the Giants skipper for the past month, has been playing up for it, and he had his best game last season, kicking 5 goals. And also a report came out too that he's been playing through a foot injury. He broke a 5th metatarsal in his foot, which is extremely painful. We see that basketballers sort of digress a little bit, but Brook Lopez hurt his 5th metatarsal on a couple of occasions when he was playing for the Brooklyn Nets. And for what Green's been doing at the moment to try and battle through that is quite incredible. And I think just having him back there up forward with his goal sense, ability to work one-on-one in contests and knowing when to read the fly to the ball, when the ball does hit the ground, and just being in the right spots at the right time. I think I already mentioned too Carlton Tolstrup and his sort of few defensive tagging role jobs that he's done this season, and previously these last 6 weeks he's done sort of switched into being a small defender. He's played on Charlie Cameron, played on Riley West last week, and I think he's probably going to have the match up on the Giants skipper, and I think it'd be a very good learning challenge for him. Your thoughts?
Yeah, look, I haven't paid tons of attention to Carlton Tolstrup's work. I think any time you've got a younger player playing on one of the greats, though, it is a good opportunity. So let's hope he's not a tagger forever. Take some learnings out of this week, and maybe he can do something special up in Alice. We'll see.
And Stephen King has mentioned too, I think in some press conferences, that he's just giving Tolstrup these learning experiences this season. And I think he was primarily drafted as a forward out of Subiaco in the Waffle in 2023 and has had to sort of slowly bite his way through, and last season to now, and probably primarily that first I think it was the second game this season against Fremantle at Optus Stadium where he did an extremely effective tagging role on Caleb Sarong, holding him to 16 disposals. But also the other part to this game, I think when you look at everything pretty closely, both sides the last 5 weeks have done really well around stoppages. So whoever can get a real ascendancy on that can go a long way to winning it. Also, I think work from turnovers is going to be a big part too. Melbourne do an extremely good job of transferring play from their back 50, and they don't seem to lose a lot of sight of that too when things aren't going their way. I think last week against the Bulldogs, right, trailing by 5.5 goals, they didn't lose. They're there to keep attacking, and eventually it did start to pay dividends in the back end of the first half when they were able to close the margin within, I think, a kick at half time. So those are the things that you take along the way if you're a Melbourne supporter, and seeing what's already been done this first half sample of the season and retrospectively for the Giants and what they're doing at the moment. It's all very similar correlations to the way both teams want to play at the moment. We'll move on now to the final game, Woody, and it's West Coast against Essendon at Optus Stadium. You can probably see the sigh in your face at the moment in your reaction to this too. The Eagles and the Bombers, with Essendon coming off what's been, let's say, a tumultuous week with Brad Scott sacking after 3.5 seasons at the club. The West Coast Eagles gave a good account of themselves against Collingwood, pushing them all the way, end up losing by 10 points. Where's one point that we sort of want to focus our attention on first and foremost, Woody?
I mean, if you've got one thing to point to be the remote at the TV and press the off button, you'll be good to go. You'll have other things you can enjoy, that sort of thing. I mean, same as last week. Like, what? Like, I understand we've already bagged out Essendon enough. Like, to be honest, I've spent enough time bagging them, but they genuinely suck. And I think Kane Corns is on the money here. This is hardly Brad's fault, as much as Brad, and don't get me wrong, I don't think he's a great coach, but like, the leadership at Essendon has sucked for ages. When they've got all of them on the park and have everybody available, the side doesn't look absolutely terrible. But like, who has that ever in footy, really? So I don't know, man. Like, they've kind of been backing in the same injured horses forever, and then get surprised when they go down injured again. We didn't even discuss Ridley wanting to leave. Last year wanted to go to Brisbane. This year is just get me anywhere in Queensland, get me out of here. And who blames him? Who could blame him? Why would you? When Essendon puts up the kind of efforts that they have. Look, I'm all hopeful for them to finally start turning a corner, but I've made my opinions known of what their board does and how their board acts. I don't think there'll be any change in Essendon, and if they do go down the herd route, I think they're closer to folding than ever getting to a premiership. So, West Coast by 50 points again, because West Coast tried last week, and that's generally the difference between bad sides. If one of them tries, they'll win. That's about it. So, yeah, West Coast by 50, if not 100. I don't know. I just can't see any... I could see why Carlton was going to get better with a new coach. I cannot see how that's going to happen with Essendon at all. In fact, the fact that they've gotten a former board member to lead their side for the rest of the year, idiots, genuine idiots. So, yeah, and I don't know. I probably won't ever tip Essendon again until they fire Andrew Welsh. So West Coast by 100, yeah.
Who knows how long that'll be though, Woody? But
this time next year, they are so incompetent. It'll be so obvious so soon. Anyway, sorry. Continue.
No, that's fine. I just think it's the fundamentals of the Bombers when you watch them play and just miss kicks to simple targets 15, 20 metres ahead to a teammate. Sort out, I think, the first 7 minutes of Richmond Essendon last Friday night, I reckon there were about 5 clanger kicks that Essendon player had going into the middle of the field, and he thought, nah, this is not going to turn out well. Yes, there were 1 or 2 cohesive passages of play, but apart
every
from
team
that...
has a play or two that works, but yeah.
But apart from that, Woody, though, it was just sort of really just fundamental mistakes that they just keep on making. And then in defense, to sort of further back up this point, is that they tend to panic a lot in their back 50 and put another team out under pressure. Another handball goes to a teammate who's even under more pressure. So that also doesn't bode too well. And then West Coast clearances last 5 weeks have vastly improved at the moment. I think they're 8th in clearances the last 5 matches.
Bailey Williams looks great. He looks like a new man, a contract year, as they say. So maybe this is a short little bounce, but he looks good.
And I think also, too, West Coast having sort of the more gel continuity at the moment with 2 of their most experienced players, Tim Kelly, Elliot Yeo in the middle, alongside Harley Reid. I think that's sort of the dynamic anyway that Eagles fans were hoping to sort of have more regularly of, and considering Elliot Yeo's injury history in recent seasons, Tim Kelly's too as well, a little bit of positional change in the previous season, right, where he was primarily playing a half-forward but now back on ball. So I think Eagles should win this too, and sort of the last couple of weeks have seen a lot more reward for them too, at least for their endeavour, their efforts at the moment. So expect the Eagles to win this one too, but stranger things have happened, but you sort of can't see.
I don't know that stranger things have ever happened, man. Like, I'm going to tell you a secret. I was on Round the Twist when I was a kid, so I've seen some pretty strange things. And it'd take one of the wildest things on earth for Essendon to win. So go. There's a Round the Twist Wikipedia page there. Go search up Woody and you'll find me as a kid.
We'll see what does eventuate from this game too, but the Eagles' favourites going into this one too. I think it was it $1.50 or something, or $2.40, something like that. Wherever you find, wherever those particular places are. Well, that is all we have time for here on the latest episode of Out on the Full through Scoreboard Media. Thank you again for your listenership as always, and Woody, thank you once again for your brilliant analytical insights to each of the 7 games for this round, and also breaking down also Neil Danaher's legacy and what he left to for the work that he did for this fighting MND, and also Brad Scott's departure as Essendon coach. Thank you once again.
Thank you for having me, mate. And everybody out there, enjoy your weekend. Hopefully your side wins, unless you're a Hawthorn fan, in which case I hope you lose by 100. Enjoy the week.
Thank you. And thank you again, listeners, for your listenership for this episode. If you want to find this episode or any of our others, you can access it through your various podcast feeds on Apple or Spotify or wherever you get your podcasts. Don't forget as well to check out Woody's work on Wooden Spoon Data on YouTube and on Saints TV with Jake. He's done a couple of recent videos, one on the numbers breakdown from the game against Fremantle, and more recently the boys also broke down the round 11 clash against the Dockers last Friday at Optus Stadium. And if you want to watch us, you can also find us on YouTube. We'll see you next week.